all, and welcome to this webcast. My name is Jesper Schleimann, and I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for SAP in Northern Europe. There is a critical need for all enterprises to truly become purpose-driven and conduct sustainable operations that move the needle on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals on a global scale. Despite the many advances we've made, though, meaningful progress will require us to harness technology effectively at scale. As technology can be an enabler to accelerate progress on the SDGs by unlocking insights from our vast data resources, as well as measuring our collective progress. The good news is that money is actually following this trend. There's now a greater focus than ever from investors, institutional, private investors, and purchasers alike on sustainability. And joining me today is a panel of passionate business leaders within sustainability as well, where we'll discuss these topics. So first of all, we have Balaji from Deloitte, the global leader for consulting. We have Christopher Wellise from HP Enterprises, the Chief Sustainability Officer. And then we have Brian Duffy, President for SAP in Northern Europe. Welcome all. So just to kick it off, how are companies partnering together to unlock the potential of data to drive impact at scale? And how are you seeing that happen?
So I'll start. I actually think we had great momentum coming out of Davos just a few weeks ago, where the level of awareness has started to ratchet up. And obviously we're going through getting to the new normal with COVID. We'll get to that in a few. But I would say that the awareness on SDG is really, really high, but less than a fifth of all corporations have actually set meaningful targets. So plenty of upside to do that. If you can measure it, obviously you can improve it. And that's an important part of what we have to do. Leading organizations have moved the needle on purpose, as you talked about in your opening, but not really on SDG. And there's some barriers around that, which I think we can work through. Embedding SDG into a company strategy, particularly as they pivot to new business models and get out of this COVID crisis, is going to be critically important. And there's a huge opportunity for technology and analytics to play a critically important role.
Maybe I can chime in, and I would add that, I think the importance of the topic and the profile has certainly been raised, and events like Davos this year certainly did that. And in addition, I think we're seeing, across the world that, the role of purpose within workplace is increasing exponentially. And now it's no longer, okay to just have the poster. I think employees of organizations really want to see how their employer is actually, what they're actually doing. So they want to be able to touch it and they want to be able to feel it. And at the same time, I think it's great to see that now that across the world that organizations, whatever industry that they're in, are reaching out to each other to see how can they collaborate together in order to reach their goals. And I'm sure we'll talk about it later as it relates to COVID-19, but obviously that's presenting new challenges, but then at the same time, opening new opportunities for us to address specifically this important topic.
So how should, and I mean, we've already been touching a little bit upon this as there's definitely even more pressure now than ever before, and also on the financial side. How should enterprise leaders be thinking about striking the right balance between driving a positive impact on sustainability while still serving the needs of the shareholders and delivering financial growth, and even maybe for some surviving in the current financial situation?
I mean, I think we're in a really interesting, critical point in time where obviously we've seen over the course of the last maybe 2 to 4, 5 years, maybe at the most, the rise of ESG really within the shareholder community as being very top of mind. And everything we're seeing even emerge today, in my view, is really about addressing societal risk, right? So in terms of building out resiliency within supply chains, as Sam had mentioned, as well as resiliency within your own business operations, but also the ability to really innovate new products that are meeting the needs of the growing customer base. Folks have asked me recently, do you really think sustainability might take a back burner based on the current pandemic related situation? And I think it's just the opposite. I think everything that we're seeing now is stress testing businesses and how they've really prepared for resiliency and for critical societal risks that have really just basically, come about in the last couple of months.
This is a great point that Christopher just made. COVID-19 has exposed the fragility of our societies and some fundamental weaknesses in our global system, right? And it also has brought together the interdependence we have on each other. And this is true for business, governments, society, etc. I think it's a really big deal as we, look at what is ahead. It is clearly not a zero-sum game. I actually see organizations starting to pivot to new things, given virtualization, redefinition of, customer contact and business models and supply chains and everything. It's a great opportunity to build an SDG into the new business model and to the new strategy as people emerge from that, to be proactive in doing that. Like I said, we can't lose sight of sustainability as we go through the recovery phase. So we're going through a phase of fear. We're starting to see some hope and hopefully some pragmatism that will come out of that as we go through responding, recovering, and hopefully getting to thriving businesses. So it is really important that now is the time to clearly focus on safety and wellness, but also look at what we could do longer term in the things we're doing today to set course to a healthier planet as well.
I would add, when the crisis itself started, I think there was, an immediate, almost like a balancing act that leaders needed to find and how to talk about anything other than COVID-19. It almost just didn't feel appropriate to really address other topics. And I think nobody knew how long that was going to last. But now where we find ourselves, I think the world over, citizens and companies have had the opportunity to reflect on that which is truly important, and the things which are truly important that started to bubble up. And obviously, those are different for different companies and for individuals as well. But I think this is certainly a topic which has been raised to the forefront even more than ever before. And now I think it represents a new opportunity for all of us to think about, what is life going to be like when we do go back to, leaving our homes and people are working again. But then also, how can we work to hopefully make sure that the crisis that did happen doesn't happen again, but also how can we choose to take care of other things which we know are priorities, but maybe we've put them on the back burner. And I think we're seeing that happen, both in our personal lives and at the same time for corporations as well. And I like to remind my team that I spent some time in Japan, and I was there when they had the very significant earthquake in 2011 in March. And that year, when I was there, rather, they had an earthquake, there was a tsunami, then there was nuclear fears that were raised at the time. But really and truly, what I saw happen in Japan at that time was, one, people take care of people, but then secondly, everybody looked at, okay, what is the normal that we find ourselves in now? And how can we start to think differently? How can we innovate? And hopefully that's going to be the same thing that's going to happen the world over. And so far, I tend to think that is what's happening. So I think it's pretty hopeful for the future, hopefully.
Chris, you mentioned that this is also a platform to think about even new products. And Sam, you also touch upon the same as well with Brian. What are some of the opportunities for values that exists, and maybe what are some of the typical elements that leaders typically overlook when we talk about sustainable business in this area?
Well, I think it's both about, solving big, audacious problems, right? I think, we're all primarily from technology companies, right? Or nearly all companies utilize technology today. And, for example, at HPE, one of the roles that we're really looking to play is, Sam had touched on the importance of machine learning and AI. We're involved in helping to focus on the crisis through the use of some of our high performance computing with the US Department of Energy at the Argonne National Laboratory and Lawrence Livermore Labs, looking to apply things like advanced analytics and high performance compute to do some of the modeling necessary to look at both, not only climate related issues, but issues specific to the pandemic around antibodies and formulating vaccines, and some of the other challenges related to this issue. So I think, technology is going to play an increasing role not just in accelerating like a cure to the pandemic, for instance, but also I think we're going to be faced with a really interesting moment in time where we have the ability to move back into more of a normal state. That normal, I hate to use the phrase the new normal because it seems a bit overused, but obviously the use of technology to transition to more of a work from home type environment, I think what we're seeing right now is also accelerating digital transformation. I'm sure you guys are seeing this within your businesses. We're going to have an opportunity to maybe take a second look at how we all work and how do we use technology in a new and better way. And maybe there's some positive benefits to the environment in doing that as well.
So in my business, I travel a lot, and I can't remember a point in time in the last 25 years where I've not been on a plane for more than a couple of weeks. But for the last 6 weeks, I live in the San Francisco area. We've been working from home. Obviously, a little bit of going green myself, but things are not going to go back to the way it was. I think that's an opportunity in our personal lives as well as in our businesses to reinvent and innovate what it could be, and to embed SDG goals as we do that. I think that's a great opportunity to think about that. So we can't lose of how important it is. And if there's anything that this has taught us, we need to be a lot more agile. We need to innovate even faster, and to think about, purpose and planet and people as we look at our own businesses, and then think about how we can do things together, share information and best practices. And my point is that you can't de-link the SDG from the COVID response, because in many cases they're actually interrelated. I'll give you an example. Look at climate risk and COVID, they have a lot in common. It's a physical shock to the system with a big socioeconomic impact. There are no boundaries. It's not contained in a city, in a country, a geography. And it's non-linear, and it's going to move pretty fast and unpredictably. And unfortunately, it's affecting a lot of vulnerable populations even more. All of those things are true for climate change as well. The differences, of course, is the speed and the velocity at which this is upon us versus climate change, which is actually in the system and it's taking a longer time, but the impact is going to be quite profound. We just don't know how much it would impact us. And if you look at technology, analytics, and data, and how we have gone through the last few weeks to make better informed decisions around tracking and tracing and testing and things like that, we have to apply those common principles again to SDG opportunity again to be innovative, be proactive, and start to think about what it could be as opposed to the way it was.
Yes, Jesper, to build on that, I think your question was, what opportunities for value exist, but I think maybe to put the inverse on it, I think given what's happened in the world right now, the question maybe to be asked of companies, well, what are our values, right? And I think now we're seeing those being reassessed as well. And for example, exactly what Sam said, we can all relate to it. We haven't been on a plane for 6, 7, 8 weeks, and your body can feel the difference, number one, right? Secondly, the P&L companies can experience the benefit of that. And in addition, the environment is as well. And I think it's kind of like, the analogy that I use back to my Japan story was an earthquake happened and literally the ground shook, right? But that the shaking of the ground was the opportunity for everybody to reassess how do we do things, especially in a country like Japan, as you know, which is very process orientated, right? And it's the same thing here today now. Okay, now the ground has shook the world over, and now it's an opportunity for all of us, corporations, to decide what are our values and how are we going to put programs in place to actually support those, because I think we're hearing from everybody how critical they are. And in addition, I think it's just on a higher level, I think it's kind of causing everybody to reflect on their own personal life as well. And really, do we need to jump on that plane? Couldn't we just jump on one of these great platforms that are benefiting from this crisis and save a buck or two and save the environment in the process as well?
For sure, and I think many people are experiencing, I think, a better air quality now, right, than ever, and are really thinking, maybe it can actually be this good, right, and maybe we should actually live with that. And well, I love also.
And yes, I'm living in London, and we all know it's pretty rainy. And for 8 weeks, we've had blue skies, and we're all just wondering, how is this a gift from God, or how is this happening right now? Is there some connection? I guess, you know, time will tell, right?
Well, it's interesting. We've all talked about the use of visual collaboration for what, 10, 15 years even, in the ability to leverage technology to have a positive impact on climate. Now we're really kind of forced to do it. I think we're going to have some really interesting data to support what is the benefit of visual collaboration, both from a work at home, family work-life balance perspective, as well as a climate perspective. Like, you know, the data is coming in almost on a daily basis. So I think finally the theoretical is becoming a reality, and we have an opportunity to really test what that looks like.
We all somewhat based in the technology sector, right? At least a pretty good stake in it. And you touch upon a space where technology can play a pivotal role in tackling these and helping enterprises tackle the great challenges of this world. I'm interested if you can share a bit of your perspective on how you see technology at best can help enterprises tackle some of these great challenges and ultimately help businesses become more sustainable businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, one of the ways we can do it is, for instance, through the collaboration that we're all involved in, right? The SDGs, in my view, really represent true long-termism. How do you move towards sustainable development through these 17 goals, the 169 targets, and the nearly 230 some odd indicators? Part of the problem is, as you know, Jesper, you're in the trenches with this, is we have, you know, CRP data, we have enterprise systems, but how do we actually measure toward our progress, toward actually impacting these SDGs? So I think not only can technology be applied in the use of digital transformation, where you're actually moving businesses toward a new paradigm, but it could also be applied in terms of measuring our impact and progress toward the SDGs themselves. So I think those are kind of the two kind of buckets of the application of technology that I see are critical. And of course, Sam mentioned it earlier and we kind of touched on it, but certainly data is the new currency. And so technology is going to be necessary in order to reduce time to value for businesses so they can actually recognize and meet the needs of their own customers, recognize those data insights. So I think increasingly technology will need to be applied across whatever industry you might be in, whether it's grid resiliency if you're in the energy space, or whether it's accelerating cures for disease if you're in the healthcare space, or whether it's financial market modeling. I think technology has a role to play in all aspects of modern society.
If you look at what we're going through in local jurisdiction, city government, smart cities have been coming together for the last few years. But as we look at what needs to be the new societal way we need to engage with each other and the businesses that we interact with, I think that's a great opportunity, to Chris's point, come up with the digital transformation of cities and the businesses in the cities, and then the enterprises surrounding that. How can we enable the creation of value and the time to value, as he talked about, is really important. It's an opportunity to rethink and reimagine the future now. And I think it's a wonderful point in time, because the simple thing would be to say, let's go back to the way it was. But I think it's a lost opportunity and a lost cause. And a lot of the leaders in business, society, and government are actually picking up on that. An important part, which I haven't talked about much here, is the role of government and public-private partnerships. And that is going to be one of the big drivers as we look at it, particularly given the trillions of dollars of stimulus money that is going into this. I actually think this is going to be important. So coming up with simple KPIs, what we have is a fragmented set of measures across the enterprise that exists today. And to pick a few again that align with purpose, the SDG goals and the standards of the company, and then get going without getting caught up in standards and definitions. Let's look at it from a business and an outcome perspective, and then get started on how can you start to report on that impact transparency and, baby steps towards the longer term solution that will evolve over time. Because I do think companies are starting to create platforms. You're from SAP, obviously there's work underway today. How do you start to report on not top and bottom line alone, but also the green line and things like that? So there's a phenomenal upsurge in new technology capabilities that's going to come about, particularly with the onset of cloud computing and the things that are going on in that area.
I think obviously, data, like they said so eloquently, is the gold dust, and that's what can allow us to understand where are we now. And then at the same time, we can look at, okay, how can we use the technologies that are available to us to actually take us to the end state of where we want to be, to truly, as Sam said, build these smart cities. But at the same time, I think it's going to require, not only, it's going to require collaboration between multiple technology partners to come together in order to be able to deliver that end state. And I think at the same time, we see that happening, let's say, with our customers when it relates to digital transformation. And now I think what we need to see is an increased collaboration between companies together so that we can reach this end state combined.
I was thinking maybe, Chris, do you want to just add a few words on your perspective on our joint work here to help enterprises better understand the impact of their operations?
Sure, yeah. And I think it really kind of ties together everything we've talked about here this morning or the afternoon in the case of Brian, which is, I think it's about how do we apply technology to help companies measure progress, help governments measure progress, and agencies, perhaps the UN, measure progress toward the SDGs. I think, that's really been a key challenge, is some of the most highly available data isn't necessarily the most valuable data. And some of the most difficult to uncover data might be the more valuable, hence SAP's involvement in this. And obviously the back-end systems that you guys develop for multiple businesses across varied industries globally. What we've really struggled to do is we know businesses are going to be a major contributor and have to be involved in order to accelerate progress toward the SDGs. But how do we combine forces from a technological perspective to actually look at what we're doing within existing data systems and then measure and map that toward progress so that both businesses collectively and at a higher level, governments and agencies can measure the effect that we're actually having in terms of progress toward the goals themselves.
It is one of the most important bottlenecks and challenges to unlock, right? It's gaining this level of shared transparency and to enable us to move forward. My great mentor always said, exponential problems require exponential solutions. And I think we all know that technology in its nature is exponential. And by kind of almost like hot wiring sustainability at enterprises, we can pull the full power of exponential technologies towards overcoming these exponential challenges that the Sustainable Development Goals often represent. So thanks for that. I think what would be interesting also before we hit some of the final minutes is maybe to talk a little bit about how companies that are tracking their contribution, how they can leverage these data in different ways. I mean, how can companies who better understand, for instance, their CO2 impact or their diversity of lack of same or wastewater disposal or plastics, how can this be turned into a good business opportunity? Any perspectives on that?
Yeah, I think the industry sector specific considerations are quite different, but opportunities exist in asset heavy industries as well as services industries. It's across the board. It is just the manifestation is different. So we talked about, factories and emissions and things like that. That's clearly one thing. But even if you look at a business that is primarily in the services economy, financial services institutions, for example, they have suppliers. And it's the thing that Brian was talking about, business ecosystems, the interdependency they have with their suppliers, their customers, and other providers, technology included, is going to be important. I actually think to think about it a lot more holistically than just within the enterprise is going to be important. That's where the shared learnings comes in and how we can do things together and pushing things to suppliers, people and communities and things like that. I think businesses have an important role to play as we, look at the future. I also think you touched on finance. That's a really important thing. One of the commitments we had, even before going into Davos, was responsible finance and how much investment was going to go into companies that were more responsible from carbon neutrality or SDG goals. I think that's going to be an important shift around where the money goes. Business models tend to follow the money quickly, and they will readapt and energize. I think that's where the innovation is going to kick in heavily. So obviously the short term, we are seeing some of, the fossil fuel stuff and things like that. The challenges we'll have to work through. But I do think it's a great opportunity, again, across industry sectors. And Chris talked about healthcare, government. There's many different aspects. It is going to be different for us as business leaders to set the tone at the top, collaborate meaningfully, not just within our enterprises, but across enterprises with shared learnings and collective wisdom. I think that's going to be important. And then, change the thinking between, as I said, between government, academics, and businesses, and the triangle that needs to come together so that the velocity increases as we go into the future.
Obviously, companies are putting a priority on this topic because it's the right thing to do. But at the same time, not only is it the right thing to do, but I think companies can also see that it's having an impact on their, let's say, business objectives as well. One example would be that, I think it's fair to say that in many industries, there is a war on talent. And, we've all heard the mantra of purpose-driven performances. And we're increasingly seeing that the younger population, or let's say Generation Z, is looking for an employer who has a strong sense of purpose. And I think consumers and employees and, even, let's face it, investors are increasingly choosing companies based on their social and environmental policies. And if you're a brand, being sustainable is important to your reputation. And if you're an employer, equally being sustainable is important to you and to ensure that you can attract talents. And these are just some of the ways that companies, let's say, are reaping the benefits when it comes to implementing the right policies and ultimately doing the right thing.
Yeah, and just quickly to build on what Brian said, I think we're even seeing that now, right? In terms of you've seen this stock market downturn, things are coming back a little bit, but there's analysis to even show that companies that were high ESG performers have actually performed much better than those that were not throughout this downturn.
Interesting.
And ultimately, it's all about data, right? It's the approach toward a common reporting framework, which you guys know, our teams are working on diligently to really help these varied stakeholder groups that Sam mentioned, whether it's governments, investors, what have you. For instance, if you look at just the environmental related SDGs, about a quarter of them are supposedly on track to meet the target if the current trends continue. But for nearly 68% of those, there's not enough data to assess the progress toward those goals. So I think that's why data and technology are going to play such a critical role. Back to Sam's earliest point in the conversation, which is you can't manage what you don't measure. And in this case, there's simply not enough data. So it's amassing the data, but also figuring out the way to extract those insights from that data is going to be critical to show progress.
And I would say definitely based on some of the findings and discussions we're having with leading enterprises, we're seeing signs that the financial institutions are becoming better at pricing in the risk of enterprises who are more heavily exposed in their supply chain or are not meeting, let's say, either ESG or more sustainable targets. And I think if we get that risk priced in, if you are, let's say, operating in more black or gray business, then you have a basis for more business model disruption, I think, in mid to long term. And hopefully that can lead us to a better world. We use this platform going forward. And so with that, I just, as we're nearing the end of our webcast here, I just want to pose a final question to each of you. And I think our viewers would love to hear your perspective on what you can do, or piece of advice, what you can do as a person working perhaps in a large organization or an enterprise wanting to accelerate the move towards becoming more purposeful business or sustainable business.
Sure, maybe I can take that, and I would say my advice would be, don't wait. I think it's fair to say that sustainability is the new frontier, and especially right now. And looking back at the past few months, there's never been a better opportunity for enterprises to partner with governments and NGOs and social enterprises to better understand how this, let's say, the crisis which has happened is going to help us deliver against the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it goes back to the saying that it really does take a village. So my advice would be, you know, don't wait, start now, and pull people in to help you reach those goals and open up the door to a lot of collaboration.
The highest cost is not doing anything with SDG now. So be proactive, get going, to Brian's point. I think part of it is also sharing success stories, even as simple as they might be, to start to communicate impact, positiveness, and things like that, which will go a long way for people to understand and appreciate. And as the points that were made before, investments in SDG are not only the right thing to do, it's also good for the business. And the points that were made, leading businesses do the right thing, are responsible, and will be more profitable and sustainable. If you look at what we have in front of us, there's clearly a financial risk, there's a brand risk, there's a reputation risk, and the risk of not attracting the right talent for the future. So get going now and don't waste time in getting back on the agenda, which we were actually set course on a few months ago. So the time is now to act, and this is going to be the decade of action.
Agreed. And just connecting the dots between what Brian and Sam both said, I mean, I would say go big and be bold, right? I mean, it's sort of how we all got together and why we're on this call here today is, I think Jesper, you had some great ideas with a number of folks in our respective companies where we said, hey, look, we know businesses are going to need to be a major contributor if we're going to have a positive effect on the SDGs. But how do we help each other measure that? How do we potentially help the UN take a look at how our companies and all companies are contributing toward the SDGs? And I think it was that big, bold vision that led to this collaboration. And regardless of what comes out of it, I think we are going to figure out, we're going to uncover some valuable aspects to this problem, right? And I think, you know, necessity is really the mother of invention, as they say, right? So I think, you know, go big, go bold, and definitely partnering. I think our jobs as sustainability innovation experts are really to assimilate subcultures within companies. So you ask what individuals can do within their own companies. It's connect those dots, bridge those silos, and come in with a big, bold plan. And I think you'll see great things come out of that.
Don't wait, share success stories, go big, be bold, and measure for transparency. I think should be this panel's 4 pieces of advice. With that, I would like to thank you all, dear panelists, for joining us here together at home. It's been an absolute pleasure and a very interesting conversation that I'm sure our viewers will enjoy. I wish you will stay safe and take care. Thank you.